Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Hope and Healing, Black Colleges and the Future of American Democracy by John Silvanus Wilson, Jr. Narrated by Bill Andrew Quinn. Publisher's Note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type Hope and Healing into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the Supplemental Content section, please enter the access code ICEBERG and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures and tables referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. We are indeed the river, and at the same time, the river is more than us, generations more, millions more. For the Black River in the United States has always taken on more than blackness. The dynamics and justice of its movement have continually gathered others to itself, have consistently filled other men and women with the force of its vision, its indomitable hope. And at its best, the river of our struggle has moved consistently toward the ocean of humankind's most courageous hopes for freedom and integrity, forever seeking what Black people in South Carolina said they sought in 1865, the right to develop our whole being. Vincent Harding, There is a River, 1981. Malcolm X, the ideological father of the BCM, Black Campus Movement, once reasoned, "You don't stick a knife in a man's back 9 inches and then pull it out 6 inches and say you're making progress." The BCM pulled out the knife several inches. The new ideals, the new racial constitution gave higher education the tools to fully extract the knife and heal the wounds inflicted by over 100 years of the moralized contraption, standardization of exclusion, normalized mask of whiteness, and latter altruism. 40 years, now 50, have passed since the demise of the BCM. Has the knife been fully removed? Have the wounds been healed? Has higher education racially advanced? Are we making progress? Ibram X. Kendi, The Black Campus Movement, 2012. What if America understood finally, in its 400th year, that we have never been the problem but the solution? Nicole Hannah Jones, The 1619 Project, 2019. Prologue. I approach this narrative with a mindset informed by 3 key perspectives. First, I believe America's historically Black colleges and universities, HBCUs, are a threatened national treasure. These institutions stabilize the country by giving critical masses of previously enslaved Americans a pathway to a new future. Many people are aware that most HBCUs were born following the Civil War, but few realize that American southern states were once home to well over 300 fledgling operations resembling those that would later survive to be called HBCUs. The federal researcher who led the 1966 search for signs of lifeless HBCUs referred to his task as a study of a few dead trees without any definite idea of the total number in the forest. Unsurprisingly, he also determined that most of the 300 institutions closed due to a lack of financial backing. From the start, precarity was a normal feature of HBCU life. Modest relief arrived when, as part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society legislation, Congress used the Higher Education Act of 1965 to officially define an HBCU as a school of higher learning that was accredited and established before 1964, and whose principal mission was the education of African Americans. There were 117 HBCUs at that time. 81 were privately funded, 36 were publicly funded, and not one had ever been sufficiently funded. The federal institution and student-based aid provided by the Act eased, but did not erase, HBCU precarity. The lack of any public alarm when 2/3 of the sector disappeared was predictable in the racially charged post-Civil War era. For decades after emancipation, it may have been as unremarkable to see stillborn Black institutions on the roadside as it was to stumble upon lynched Black individuals. But the disregard has persisted. Since 1965, 17 HBCUs, or 14.5%, have perished with no detectable alarm. To the degree that the departed institutions are aptly compared to dead trees, the persistent silence about their fate may indicate, philosophically, that the HBCU trees in America's higher education forest are the ones that fall without making a sound. But this portends a larger, intolerable outcome. If the country remains deaf to the sound of the next 17 HBCUs to fall, and the 17 after that, the eventual disintegration of an important American legacy may be inevitable. Once an HBCU dies, it can never be replaced. That is why the second perspective, the largely veiled significance of these campuses, is so critical. One of the reasons why the HBCU sector has remained so threatened is because the true value of the institutions has remained so obscure. As a third-generation HBCU graduate, my life and career have convinced me that, in far too many American mindsets, HBCU virtues seem invisible or veiled. Personally, I removed that veil based on my experiences as an HBCU student, trustee, and president. But my experiences as a student and trustee in white higher education have been extraordinarily demystifying and veil-lifting as well. I am now convinced of the revelatory power of discussing HBCU history in the context of the larger history of American higher education. That contextualization helps to reveal what HBCUs have done to actualize democracy. Minimally, it sheds light on what non-HBCUs have failed to do. For instance, it is worth asking why the civil rights movement failed to emerge a century before it did. Why was such a movement not launched before the dawn or at the sunset of Reconstruction, and led by Ivy League students and alumni, as encouraged by their professors and presidents? Perhaps because so many non-HBCUs drew great institutional wealth from centuries of human enslavement, scores of their alumni could essentially ignore the ensuing persistence of society's stark and systemic injustices. Moreover, a variety of disciplines, from theology to the sciences and social sciences, helped to construct an entire world of thought to justify, sanction, and abide the protracted wrongdoing. Should the graduates of non-HBCUs be blamed if neither their education, nor their religion, nor their definition of democracy inclined them to spend their lives fighting to realize true justice for all Americans? Were those shaped by HBCUs different because they experienced college differently? In what sense? And why didn't higher education's billion-dollar capital campaign era launch in the early 1970s with huge investments in HBCUs, following the civil rights movement, instead of in the mid-1980s? Why did America's philanthropic community neither facilitate nor reward HBCUs for their signature work to advance American democracy? Was the empowerment of institutions built for marginalized and minoritized communities deemed insufficiently investment-worthy? Why? What kind of education fixed such biased viewpoints in the mindsets of so many real and potential philanthropists? The fixed mindsets of the wealthy aside, given that the earliest yield of American higher education was a Christian outlook, how and why did human enslavement last so long? What brand of Christianity allowed such inhumanity? And who were those white Northerners whose Christian outlook compelled them to leave their homes and lives to travel south so they could teach in HBCUs? What brand of Christianity provoked such humanity? And what happened to that far more humane Christianity in America? Where did it go? Will it ever return? By contrast, since then, why have so many Americans remained boastful of living in a Christian nation while abiding such stark, long-standing, hate-authored inequities and inequalities? Was the Christianity of those who helped found and stabilize HBCUs a fundamentally different religion from the Christianity of those who made HBCUs necessary? And which Christianity is more evident in an uncertain America wandering toward the middle of the 21st century? The aggressive one that cruelly subjugates, the idle one that righteously repudiates, or the engaged one that actively liberates? The true value of HBCUs can be found in the quality of the citizens they shaped, particularly as compared to those shaped by non-HBCUs. Throughout their history, HBCUs have educated many to have uniquely humane mindsets about what constitutes a meaningful life. Unlike most college graduates in America, countless HBCU alumni have de-emphasized the luxury of simply finding a comfortable place in the current system. Instead, many have inclined themselves toward movements to humanize and democratize the system to make it more reflective of America's founding egalitarian principles. Their push for justice was essentially framed as a quest to realize a more perfect union. While HBCU graduates have entered society with competitive skill sets suitable to play the game well, many of their mindsets have uniquely prioritized changing the game itself. That evokes the third perspective that informs the mindset I bring to this work. Very simply, the world needs better citizens. That is, there is now an urgent need for people who will be devoted to securing the health of the planet as they work to ensure a more egalitarian quality of life for all who inhabit it. To those critical ends, colleges and universities are uniquely situated to play a far more active role, which will likely determine the quality of our future. In my view, meeting today's challenges will require a scaled effort by American higher education to optimize the kind of difference that HBCUs actualized. That is, educating citizens who will compassionately choose the common good over personal gain. When Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice," he spoke as a man who spent the majority of his life engaged in the effort to bend it. The notion that the arc might bend on its own, King left neither to chance, faith, nor others. He understood the power of human agency as a vehicle for divine prophecy. It matters that an HBCU helped to shape King's mindset. And since the HBCU sector similarly shaped the mindsets of many others, I have chosen in this book to highlight some key aspects of their approach. I firmly believe every campus community should be guided by a single consequential question. What must we now do to optimize our capacity to shape better citizens? As a tribute to the HBCU tradition of shaping better citizens, I share a story told by my friend Ayikwe Arma in his 1979 novel, The Healers. Arma, like his protagonist, Dinsu, personally exemplifies the unique HBCU-like difference. And since that difference is precisely what may save today's world, I also use the story with his permission, both as an overall theme and as the anchor to this book's final chapter. The Captive Pigeon. The last day, Saturday, came, the day when the champion for the entire games would be chosen. In ordinary years, the champion was known before the final day, but this year was extraordinary. The way the competitions had gone so far, no one could tell who would be the champion at the end of the day. Between Apia and Dinsu, the rivalry had been so close. Only the last day's competition could decide who would win the final victory. The morning was sunny, the air clear. The world was quiet. Everything seemed paralyzed with suspense, waiting for the final competition. This competition was to be in the exhibition of hunting skills. The ancient hunting tools, arrows, spears, knives, were not to be used. Ages had passed since the gun had replaced them. The first test was simple. The competitors were to shoot bullets at a barrel set 23 lengths from the firing line. The first crack of gunshot relaxed the crowd a little, and some began to talk. The tension did not disappear, however. It turned into a sort of eager anticipation, a charge in the air. One youth, Kweku Sipi, failed to hit the barrel. He had to walk away from the line of competitors. The crowd did not even care to notice his shame. The barrel was moved to 30 lengths. Again, the gunshots blasted the air. 2 youths fell out from the line. Buntu and Patu. 40 lengths. 1 more fell out. Dejan. When there were only 5 competitors left, it seemed no one would miss the target and be dropped. All 5 shot with consistent skill and care. But at the 90 lengths one, Antobam shot wide of the barrel. Another, Ampa, missed it at 100 lengths. By mid-afternoon, there were only 3 competitors left, Anan, Apia, and Dinsu. The crowd showed signs of growing impatience, but the judges were patient. They moved the target just a little farther after each round of shots. Each time, all 3 remaining competitors hit the barrel. The crowd was torturing itself with uncertainty. Then an eager voice shouted, "Bring the birds!" At the sound of that call, a look came over Dinsu's face as if there was something urgent he needed to tell the judge. He actually took a few steps in the direction of the judge. But before he came close enough to speak to him, he changed his mind and walked away again. He was smiling, a strange smile, as if he were smiling in spite of the pain. The birds were fated to die. The competitors would have to take turns shooting at them. If a competitor was successful, his bird died. If a competitor failed, his bird was pulled back down, then released for the next competitor to shoot at. The birds were brought. They were young pigeons, each tied at the end of a very long string. At a signal from the judge, a bird would be let go. When it had flown as high as the tallest tree nearby, the judge would give the order, and 1 competitor would fire. Anan was the first of the remaining 3 called to shoot. 3 guns had been loaded ready for him, and he was quick in their use. He fired all 3 before the bird had flown the length of the string. The first shot was inaccurate. It missed the bird entirely. But the second grazed its tail and brought a feather spiraling wildly down in the startled wind. The third shot blasted the bird into a plunging mess of blood and bones and feathers. But the success of the third shot affected Anan strangely. In his behavior there was no trace of joy or success. His arms shook slightly, and he seemed quite unable to look at the remains of the bird he had killed. Apia shot next. He wasted just 1 shot, the first. The second brought down the bird. The bullet had pierced it straight through its body. Then it was Dinsu's turn to shoot. Dinsu picked up the first gun. He stepped aside, leaving the 2 other guns on the ground beside him. The judge released the pigeon, and it flew. At first it hovered low, uncertainly, quite close to Dinsu. Dinsu aimed the gun. The bird flew into perfect range, but Dinsu did not shoot. It seemed as if he intended to wait for the bird to fly higher. The flying pigeon rose. Its flight was now much stronger, much more certain now that the shock of sudden liberation had worn off. The bird flew forward, then up. The string holding it blew widely in the wind and formed a giant curve, lengthening still. The bird had flown past Dinsu's aim, yet he did not seem disturbed. On his face had appeared a look of the intensest concentration. The judge frowned and looked impatiently at him, but Dinsu did not fire. The judge coughed a rasping cough. People in the crowd began to murmur their bafflement. This wave of small noises brought Dinsu out of his concentration, back to some sense of where he was. He aimed more carefully in the direction of the fleeing bird. A smile relaxed his face as he tensed his fingers to pull the trigger. It was a smile of utter satisfaction, a smile too deep for any watcher's comprehension. Dinsu let the gun sight rise to the pigeon. He hesitated a fraction of a moment. The pigeon flew a shade higher. Then Dinsu fired. The bird, surprised by the sudden shot in the middle of such a profound silence, faltered in its flight, then dropped from the height it had reached, as if the bullet had touched it. but in another moment the pigeon had recovered its speed and straightened out in steep free flight. For just one more moment it hovered again in the still echoing air. Then it soared high. It soared high into the sky, far beyond the aim of any hunter's weapon. The judge looked down astounded at the string which had recently held the bird. Left loose in his hand, it was now drifting foolishly back to earth. The judge looked up after the disappearing bird. Then he turned to look at Dinsu. The silence, the profound silence of the watchers echoed the judge's bewilderment. The judge asked the question agitating every mind there. "What happened, Dinsu?" "You saw what happened," Dinsu answered. "I missed the bird." "Deliberately?" the judge persisted. "You shot to hit the string, not the pigeon." "I missed the bird," Dinsu said again. He did not stay to hear what else the judge would say. Turning away from the scene of competition, he walked towards the river. When the judge came out of his surprise, he walked over to the Prince Appia where he stood and raised his right arm high above his head, the sign of final victory. He announced the coming night would be devoted to the celebration of Appia's victory. There would be feasting, there would be songs and dances, and the next dawn would see the birth of a new year. Introduction. The contradictory thing. Negroes must do a contradictory thing. They must work with all their might against segregation, and at the same time strengthen their so-called segregated institutions as if they expect them to last forever. They must insist that the doors of Harvard and Yale be kept open to Negroes, and at the same time build up Howard and Lincoln as if there were no Harvard and Yale. Mordecai Wyatt Johnson, Report of the YMCA Commission, 1928. If he is able to survive this catastrophe, he'll come out better than just strong. He'll be wise in addition to being strong. He'll see the world around him differently. Ayikwe Arma, The Healers. The only way to shape a better world is to shape better citizens of the world. Beyond enhancing basic employability, every respectable college campus should strategically aim to equip and incline people to advance the common good. One way to do that is by producing citizens who will actively engage in keeping the planet from growing so warm and human relations from growing so cold. Thus, theoretically, the core business of higher education worldwide should ultimately position each student to develop their whole being while advancing the common good. America's historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, have mattered because they embraced that agenda more and better than most other educational institutions. HBCU graduates have mattered locally, nationally, and globally. But not enough people know that. To multiple audiences today, HBCUs generally seem to matter less than they once did, less than is now apparent, and less than they still must. This book is about why this is so, and how selected black colleges might model or lead a necessarily scaled effort to shape better citizens to a greater extent and depth than has recently been witnessed or imagined. In their quest to move to a new mode of mattering, the most formidable obstacle facing HBCUs is the specter of doubt and its power over the human mind. Some minds are made up that HBCUs cannot or will not survive, much less thrive and serve as beacons for other institutions. These doubt-filled mindsets draw, in part, from the wellspring of uncertainty about the value of higher education more generally. At the very moment when some HBCUs stand poised not only to evolve, but to do so in a way that matters more broadly, this is precisely the wrong time for these campuses to have an unelevated value proposition. It is also the wrong time for their real and potential stakeholders to harbor expanding uncertainties about the necessity or benefits of the HBCU sector. It may be, however, the right time to ask some of the hardest questions. If these institutions suddenly disappear, would each of them have to be reestablished in their current form? Why? What constitutes the abiding value proposition of an institution born into a world of extreme racial equality that still retains some of its visibility and much of its unique power? What is the essence of each HBCU's raison d'etre that is unauthored by both the barbarous hatred and the radically humane promise that first made these institutions necessary a century and a half ago? Have enough HBCUs developed audibly distinctive institutional voices? Can they now amplify those voices to effectively contain or render irrelevant this era's infectious uncertainty? In his 2017 book, Unequal Colleges in the Age of Disparity, economist Charles Clotfelter tracked the changes in American higher education from 1970 to 2010. The era's volatility led him to refer to 1970 as an inflection point. Predominantly white institutions, PWIs, began to diversify, and college-level sports surged in revenue and influence, becoming a generator of institutional prestige. As wealth-based stratification intensified, college leaders grew more anxious about their financial model, and the public grew more anxious about college affordability. When state and federal funding for higher education fell precipitously, the more alert college leaders intensified their quest to amass wealth. So, in the 1980s, with institutional class divisions well underway, billion-dollar capital campaigning was born. Collectively, this was the equivalent of climate change in higher education. And just as climatologists have warned that the poorest countries are the most vulnerable to the Earth's extreme weather shifts, economists have cautioned that the poorest colleges are the most vulnerable to higher education's extreme inequity, inequality, and volatility. While Clotfelter affirms HBCUs by asserting, there is probably no more distinctive a group among those that offer bachelor's degrees, he also finds HBCUs falling farther behind on multiple critical measures of institutional competitiveness. This era of great uncertainty demands that HBCU leaders provide the public with a broader, deeper understanding of why they matter, especially since they have evolved from once enrolling nearly all African Americans in higher education to enrolling less than 9% of this group by 2018. Of course, if that change reflects a deliberate, strategic enrollment refinement, then it must be unthreatening. But if it signals a decline in the power of HBCUs to attract students, then it begs a question. How do you manage the uncertainty surrounding your existence when so much of your previously captive audience appears to no longer find you captivating? Institutional consideration for the record. The unelevated value of HBCUs. Consider a time when the captivation power of HBCUs was unrivaled. In 1928, as Mordecai Wyatt Johnson began his 34 years in office as the first African-American president of Howard University, his former colleagues urgently sought his wisdom. In 1916, Johnson had served as a student secretary of the International Committee of the Young Men's Christian Association, or YMCA. He served for nearly a year before abruptly resigning in protest of the YMCA leadership's tolerance of racism. Nonetheless, he was revered by his African-American YMCA colleagues, who continued to value and seek his wisdom. In his 12 years after he left, the racial conflicts worsened and crystallized into a major crisis. Once summoned, Johnson briefly re-engaged with the YMCA to offer a timely and timeless resolution. The YMCA had arrived in America from London in 1852. After launching its inaugural program at the Old South Church in Boston, the organization began to establish associations throughout the country. Predictably, as the movement headed farther south, it soon came into conflict with Southern-style racial apartheid. The younger YMCA members, black and white, believed the brotherhood imperatives of Christianity to be superior to the segregation imperatives of Jim Crow. Conversely, out of respect for the demands of the Southern racial hierarchy,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?